All right, everyone, today we are talking about the roundoff. It is a flight skill, which means your hands and feet will be leaving the surface and they will be in the air at the same time for a brief moment. There is some rotation that will be happening as well as the body rotates from the hands to the feet in the flight phase. Now, the thing to understand about a roundoff is it is basically a skill that is taking forward motion and turning it into backwards. So there's an element of a turn involved in the roundoff, very similar to the cartwheel. And generally, the roundoff is, I'm going to say the roundoff is probably one of the most worked on skills in gymnastics. The handstand is something you definitely want to master, but the roundoff is something that really is a key component to most tumbling and vault, and you're going to see it on beam when you start doing dismounts, and it's a skill that takes lots of years to develop and understand how to use appropriately. So we're going to dive in. This is more of the basics of a roundoff, not so much all the complex. This is just what you basically need to understand, the simple stuff. So linear momentum. Okay, linear momentum is moving your momentum in a straight path. The roundoff wants to travel horizontally. We are not looking for a massive up and down action. So looking at where one orange star is to the other, and you get the blue arrows in between, it's basically saying you need to be able to carry your center of mass through the transitional shapes to the other side without slowing down or losing any of your linear momentum. Now there's angular momentum in this because the roundoff is turning over, it's creating a circling effect. But what you need to understand is the transition shapes are not supposed to slow you down. And we learned about this in running and in cartwheels and in other movements. So as you're placing the hands on the ground, they are not trying to stop you from moving. And that is a very key thing to understand, because most people place their hands on the ground and it actually slows them down, or they place their foot on the ground in their hurdle and it actually slows them down. There is a flight phase. We can see it towards the end. And the flight phase needs to stay low to the surface. We do not want it to go flying up in the air, because the faster you get back onto the surface, the quicker you can translate that energy into something else. And so the more time you spend in the air, the more difficult it's going to become essentially to convert that energy in a roundoff. Okay, so linear momentum. Simple way to test if a person has the ability, the force, to move their center of mass an appropriate distance to make a roundoff work. Just make them do a long jump, the distance of their feet to hands overhead. And so if they can move their center of mass a full body length, then they probably can do a roundoff. And I think that's a very simple test, but oftentimes we try to correct the roundoff without realizing a person cannot move their center of mass and maintain the momentum through the process of the movement. So check out their long jump, see how it goes. Angular momentum, we are converting linear momentum to rotational. Okay, so that's what you need to understand, is we're converting linear to rotational. On the left side it says easy. Less linear momentum is needed because there's a lot of shape change. So if you do not have a lot of linear momentum, you need to increase the shape change to develop the angular momentum. There's also lower impact forces when you have lots of shape change. So that is the benefit of shape changing a lot. The image is not showing you a lot of shape change, it's showing you a lever, but you'll get to see what I'm talking about later on. The difficult side, okay, so you need more linear momentum, there's less shape change involved, but there's a higher impact force. If you're in a straighter line and you hit a surface in a straight line, you're going to have a higher impact force than if you hit it perpendicular, essentially, than if you hit it at an angle that is falling. So you look at A, B, C. The closer your hands get to A, B, or C, it's really probably impossible to get your hands to C, but the more angular momentum you're going to have, the more shape change that is required. The more closer your hands get to 1, 2, 3, if you put your hands all the way up to 3 as you're starting to do a roundoff, that line is going to be pushing into the surface and it's actually slowing you down or stopping you. And so depending on what you're trying to achieve, vault is generally more of a 3. But handsprings and whipping kind of stuff, you're always trying to lean more towards the C. We call this a late block versus an early block. Okay, so linear momentum, angular. Okay, here we go. So Angular momentum is rotating around your center of mass by shape changing on a surface. It is important you understand that when the shape change happens on the surface, it's angular momentum. When the shape change happens in the air, it is rotational inertia. So, angular momentum on the surface. The more linear momentum and the more shape change on the surface, the more angular momentum generated. What this is saying is, if you have max amount of linear momentum and you have max amount of shape change, you can actually throw the most difficult skills. That's like what a double layout is. A double layout has a lot of shape change and it has a lot of linear momentum, and both of those things combined allow you to flip your body in a laid out position twice. So the image on the left, more force required because you're in a straighter line. The circle is bigger essentially, and so it requires more push to create that rotation. Image on the right, the leg is piked. This means that you're going to be kicking the leg to generate the circular action. So because you're kicking the leg to generate the circle, you don't actually need as much rotation or linear momentum to create the rotation because you're using the shape change to create the rotation. Now, neither one is right or wrong. The question is, how do you want to use it? Generally speaking, shape changing more is a better way to learn before you go into straight body shapes, because the impact forces on straight body, the ones that require more force, when you're straight body, the impact forces will break down the athlete early on, because when they're young and they're growing, they do not have a body ready to handle those impact forces. So teaching them the shape change is better. It's also safer because then you don't have to run as wildly and crazy. You just learn how to move your body, which is what they need to learn anyways. Rotational inertia. This is the shape change that happens in the air around your center of mass. Okay, so there's a flight phase that happens and the body starts shrinking its shape and it starts rotating around its center. Basically, rotational inertia is saying that the closer you are to your center, the closer the mass is to the center, okay, the easier it is to rotate. The further away the mass is from the center, the more difficult it is to rotate. However, the further the mass is from the center, although it's more difficult to rotate, it stores more energy. So doing a laid out takeoff stores more energy so that when you do shape change and shrink down, you will speed up in rotation. So this is the reason why your takeoff positions are very important, to be as tall and long as possible, and then you shape change in the air. You don't want to shrink your shape on a surface necessarily. Depends on what you're doing though. So changing your position around your center of mass, this shape change is in the flight phase. Now look at the two dotted orange lines. They're telling you how much distance your body needs to shape change. It's a pretty big distance if you look at the blue arrows that are showing where your feet are in relationship to the floor. Your body has to move a longer distance than your body is going to travel in the air, which means you have to be faster than gravity kicks in and brings you back down to the ground. So that difference tells you how fast you need to be. That speed has to be developed outside of the skill. People are not going to shape change roundoffs any faster than their ability to move as fast as they possibly can. So this is where V-slaps come into play, or other fast shape change moving things. But just want the correlation to be understood. Now, when you're in the flight phase, what I see when someone's doing, say, a roundoff back handspring, they usually wait till their feet hit the ground before they think about initiating the back handspring. What you want to be aware of is that when you're in the flight phase, you're prepping yourself for the landing, and the landing is instantaneously transitioning into the next skill. It is not waiting. You're not waiting to land and then do the skill. When your feet make contact, you're doing the skill. And so it's important to understand that you need to know the flight phase so that you can instantaneously perform the next skill right as you land. So here's some shapes going on. These are all just transitional shapes. They're not necessarily fully accurate. Look at the shoulder positions, how we're weight transferring from one side of the body to the other, okay, where the feet are traveling, how it kind of has an arc going on. It starts small, it kicks up big, and it goes back to small, this nice smooth arc. It's important to look at these lines to see how they're kind of mirroring each other, because that's really how skills are going to be working. You're going to see these nice patterns in curves and lines. So we have the star on the left side, the star on the right side. Everything happening in the middle is just transitional shapes. Your goal is not to really actually see them when the student is performing the roundoff. The flight phase is at the very end, okay? So the hands, in theory, you could say the hands are actually late blocking. You're putting your center of mass over your hands, and then the rotation is happening after the hands. So the flight phase happens after the hands. what we really want is at the beginning to get our hands as close to our feet as possible. We actually don't want to weight our hands at all. We want to have enough linear momentum that our legs kick over and fly us all the way over to the right side of the screen where the orange star is, and that our hands don't actually have a lot of push. You're not actually trying to push your hands into the ground to rise up, because what happens usually when you try to push your hands, you start to rise up early. You're actually closing your shoulder angle and bringing your toes down. And by doing that, you actually create rotation, which pulls your hands off the floor. So just something to be paying attention to. There's a lot of technical stuff happening here. The bigger question is, how do you get from one orange star to the other? Where's the flight phase? And is it moving and look like it has energy? Or is there a bunch of weird funniness happening? Early block, late block. Okay, so an early block is, if you look at the blue star, it's in front of the triangle. Okay, and we're going to say in front because it's the character is traveling backwards. So the star is behind the triangle. The triangle is in front because I'm traveling backwards. So the feet are in front. The center of mass, or the star, is behind. That's an early block. That means you're blocking before the center of mass is on top of your pivot point. Early blocks help you travel vertically. So any early block will send you up. You want to know how to go up? Do an early block. You want to know why you're not rotating? It's probably because you're early blocking. Late blocking is when the center of mass passes over the pivot point. Late blocks send you down, and down usually is what causes horizontal travel. So early block goes up, late block goes down, but down is really horizontally, so that's why we have the horizontal, because you're going to open up and put your hands on the ground. Knowing where your early block or late block is will determine what skill you're doing. Early blocks, layouts. Late blocks, back handsprings. So early block, layouts, twisting, double flipping, vault. Late blocks, back handsprings, whips. So there's another element of a roundoff, and it's roundoffs and twisting. The direction of your roundoff will determine the type of twist you're doing, and there's something clever and interesting here that you want to be aware of. So a roundoff, when it comes to twisting, depends. A roundoff, even though you're going forwards, is not necessarily a front entry skill. It depends on what you're doing. So a right roundoff is right twisting backwards. And what we mean by this is, if we were to stand with our feet together and you were to step backwards with your right foot and pivot your body, you would be twisting right, and then you would be doing a right roundoff. So it's not the twist in the roundoff that causes the twist to make it be right. It's how you step into the roundoff that causes it to be a right twist. Okay, a left roundoff is a right twist twisting forwards. So if I'm doing a roundoff standing facing forwards and I step forwards with the right leg, now my left shoulder is pulling backwards to the left as my right hand is going down, and that's actually a left twist. So it's how I get into the roundoff. That is, if I put my left foot, if I'm doing a left roundoff, so if I put my left foot forwards, then my right shoulder is going backwards. Sorry, messed that up. So my left foot's down in the roundoff, and I'm putting my left hand down, then my right shoulder is going backwards, which makes it a right twisting forwards. So a right roundoff is right twisting backwards. A left roundoff is right twisting forwards. It reverses. So left roundoff is left twisting backwards, and that is if you were to step backwards with your left foot, pivot, and then do a left roundoff, you're now twisting left. If you're doing a right roundoff, you start facing forwards, you step forwards with the right leg, and as you put the right hand down, the left shoulder pulls backwards. It's a left twist. How you finish the roundoff, really there's some stuff that goes into the twisting, but we'll talk more about twisting deeper. I just want you to understand that it's important that you actually learn how to round off right and round off left. You should not just do one. You should actually learn both directions. So there you have it. That is the roundoff. It is generally a transition between moving forwards to traveling backwards, and it is something you'll be working on quite often. Do not get discouraged if there's not a lot of linear momentum in a roundoff. It takes somebody a while. Work on the shape changes. Roundoff backwards roll is a really good, simple movement progression where they're going to pike down and just turn it into a backwards roll so the round off keeps moving. Because most people can learn to round off before they can connect a round off into anything. The backwards roll allows them to actually connect the round off to something to keep the linear momentum going. So round off backwards roll is the best prep to keeping that linear momentum going and getting the athletes to feel it. So there you have round offs. If you have any questions, find somebody, pick the brain, ask questions, challenge them on ideas, and let's get the conversation going.